Our next speaker is Stephan Wolfert. He is a veteran of the U.S. Army. Sorry, do you have something? Okay, somebody's trying to tell me something in the audience. Okay, he's a veteran of the U.S. Army and a member of Actors Equity. I don't think I've ever witnessed that combination before. So he's based out of New York City, and he's co-founded a organization called De-C-Ruit, and he's going to tell us today about using theater as medicine. Thanks.
Thanks. Thank you. Where is David, first of all? David Quammen. Thank you for switching. I can't thank you enough, truly. David gets the award for doing the most for veterans this week. So you all have a standard to reach, and thank you, Larry, for having me here. The best way to talk about De-C-Ruit is to understand where it came from, and where it came from was my personal story. And the best way to tell that is to just tell it as an actor. Fort Irwin, California, midnight. No moon. I'm on an APC, an armored personnel carrier, with my dear friend Marcus. We are on a night live fire for Bradley fighting vehicles. Marcus is actually in charge. I'm just along for the ride. We're dear friends. We've been through a lot together. Infantry officers basic course, Ranger school, the first Gulf War, and now this. Desert training for the second wave of the first Gulf War, should it be necessary. The pitch black night sky explodes with countless Bradley fighting vehicles firing their 25mm tracer chain gun ammunition downrange. Sparks fly from the barrels. Red and purple streamers from the tracer rounds flow in every direction. It looks like a battle scene from a sci-fi film. Some of the tracer rounds are ricocheting off of their targets and disappearing up into that pitch black night sky. Some of them are burying into little berms and starting fires. The vehicles are rumbling down into the range, firing and maneuvering. Spent gunpowder and diesel exhaust is pouring into our open hatch. The radio is exploding with people screaming. Some are yelling orders. Troops in the open, 2 o'clock, 250 meters. Some are just yelling, "Ah!" See, this is the shit we lived for, firing all of our ammunition at night with nobody shooting back. On the right flank, one of the Bradleys has mistaken our observer controller vehicle for a target, turns his turret and begins firing. Check fire, check your fire. Control, close the range, we're taking friendly fire. Now this is a roughly 10-ton homogeneous steel vehicle, but it's bouncing around like a Volkswagen Beetle being bashed with sledgehammers. It's designed to protect against small arms fire, pistol rounds and rifle rounds, not these 25mm tank killers. Luckily, these are the non-exploding rounds or we'd be dead already. And to be honest, the guy's a horrible shot. Most of the rounds are ricocheting off of the protective berm, then hitting the side of the track. But it was inevitable. One of the rounds lands flush on the armor, punches through, bounces around inside the track, and hits Marcus right in the face. His heart beats for another few days, but by the end of the following week, I'm handing a folded flag from his coffin to his weeping widow and 2 baby girls. Understandably, I lose it. I hop on an Amtrak train and I start traveling around the country just to figure out what's going on inside me. And when I say on an Amtrak train, I mean literally. I was on the roof of the Amtrak as we traveled through Glacier National Park in Montana. Something happened to me. I hopped off the train in Whitefish, Montana, and I wound up in a theater. I see a couple heads nodding, you know Whitefish, town of 4,000 people. But I end up in a theater, not a movie theater, but a proper playhouse where they enact plays. Me, the youngest son of a working class family who had never even been to a play before. Me, an infantry officer. I'm supposed to be a manly man, doing manly things in a manly manner with other men. Me, the youngest brother of a severe alcoholic father, a neglectful mother, and a bully brother who used to beat me up just to make me a man. And now I'm in a theater. I take my seat just as the house lights are fading, and in walks a veteran, in uniform, looks me directly in the eyes and says, "Now is the winter of our discontent, made glorious summer by this son of York. And all the clouds that lowered upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean buried. Now are our brows bound with victorious wreaths, our bruised arms hung up for monuments, our stern alarums changed to merry meetings, our dreadful marches to delightful measures. Grim-visaged war hath smoothed his wrinkled front, and now, instead of mounting barbed steeds to fright the souls of fearful adversaries, he capers nimbly in a lady's chamber to the lascivious pleasing of a lute. But I that am not shaped for sportive tricks, nor made to court an amorous looking-glass, I that am curtailed of this fair proportion, cheated of feature by dissembling nature, deformed, unfinished, sent before my time into this breathing world scarce half made up. And that so lamely and unfashionable that dogs bark at me as I limp by them, why I, in this weak piping time of peace, have no delight to pass away the time. And therefore, since I cannot prove a lover to entertain these fair, well-spoken days, I am determined to prove a villain and hate the idle pleasure of these days. I was transfixed. There I sat in the audience, and yet there I stood on stage. Like me, a soldier in uniform. Like me, conceived, gestated, born, and raised at a time of national war. For me, it was the American War in Vietnam. For Richard, the War of the Roses in England. Sure, my family wasn't murdering each other to become the King of England, but some days it sure felt like they were. That play had such a profound effect on me that I left the Army, resigned my commission to go to graduate school for acting. And in graduate school, I'm delving into these plays by Shakespeare, and I'm finding veterans in every single play. Not just the tragedies and histories, as one might imagine, but the comedies and romances too. And I realized something else in graduate school, that I'm different than my classmates who are not veterans. I respond differently if a truck goes by our rehearsal hall and shakes the walls of that rehearsal hall. I respond differently if a window's open or a door and the diesel exhaust from that truck pours into that rehearsal hall and reminds me of that night with Marcus. I respond differently if a helicopter flies over. I don't think they even notice, but I can focus on nothing else. I respond differently if somebody makes a loud noise that I did not see coming, like these mats that we had in grad school. You may know what I'm talking about. They're rectangular, and they fold out, and you Velcro them together. You know what I'm talking about? They fold back up. Apparently, they're only used in preschool and acting school. Well, my classmates had stacks of them, and they used to love to throw them up in the air so they'd land flat on the floor and make that cracking sound. And I swear to you, every time I tell the story, the hairs on my neck stand on end. My stomach tightens, my central nervous system pulses, and I want to tear apart the mat that made that noise, tear from limb to limb whoever threw that mat, and tear the flesh off of anybody who laughs at me for my reaction. What the hell is wrong with me? I was a sensitive little boy from Wisconsin that wanted to be a dancer, and now I'm some crazy vet. 20 years of asking this question of what the hell is wrong with me, working on these plays by Shakespeare, doing this classical actor training, working with veterans around the globe and psychologists and psychiatrists around the globe, I now know what the hell is wrong with me. And what is wrong with me is what happened to me. And what happened to me is I and my brothers and sisters who were recruited or drafted were done so at a psychologically malleable age, and then we were wired for war. But we were never unwired from war after our service. We were not rewired for society. So, experiencing this in graduate school, I decided that if we had a recruiter that helped prepare us for every aspect of life in the military, where was our decruiter? We don't have one in this country. So I made one. And if you don't think we need decruiters, I have slides. I don't even know how to use the damn thing, but there. If you wonder if we need decruiters, look at these statistics. Now, this is trauma, but veterans share these statistics. We're 4 to 6 times more likely to be homeless. We're twice as likely to commit a violent crime within a year of our being separated from service. We're a higher addiction rate. We commit suicide at a rate that's 4 to 5 times higher than the civilian rate. For women, men, it's 3 to 4 times higher. 20 veterans kill themselves every day in this country. Not just combat veterans, all experiences, all eras, combat and peacetime. Infantrymen and clerk typists, all areas, all backgrounds. 20 a day, that's 1 every hour and 11 minutes. So when someone speaks, does one of these presentations, at the beginning, someone who served this country took their own life, and by the time you go on break, another one has or is about to. And how many are thinking about it, not going through with it? Probably they estimate 8 times as many that are thinking about it as go through with it. So we created De-C-Ruit to help do it. Why? What's going on in the brain? What's happening? Well, you see that I have trauma as the people who experience trauma, because it's not just military trauma, but the reality is the vast majority of us who join the military are entering with childhood trauma. So trauma's trauma. Whether we get it in the military or childhood, it's a trauma brain. Why does that matter? And let me see what I've got for slides. I got to go back one to show you that it took for about 15 years. I was developing De-C-Ruit. I was using Shakespeare to rewire my brain. Then I started working with other veterans. It took 15 to 16 years to find scientists who could help me actually scientifically evaluate it. So now that we can officially say it's a veteran-informed practice, because I created it, it's with unit cohesion, much like the military's using to wire us for war using camaraderie or unit cohesion, we use it to unwire from war. And it is a trauma-informed, scientifically evaluated model. Now, we only have 35 veterans who've gone through the parameters, which is electroencephalograms, heart rate variability, and self-disclosure surveys. But I'll show you the data at the end. What's that? Oh, I thought I had a heckler. I loved it. I do live theater. I was like, what? Go on. Come on, give it to me. Okay, but here's what's going on, roughly. And this is keep in mind, this is an actor talking about this, but there's a few key areas of the brain that we're addressing when we do De-C-Ruit that came from my original experience. But where I draw this from, if you're looking for a book on this, Bessel van der Kolk, who's a colleague we're now colleagues with, rather, he wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score. He shows fMRIs of brains that have been through trauma, and they're different than brains that have not been through trauma. A scientist in Australia is taking fMRIs of brains of men and women before deployment to Iraq or Afghanistan, and then fMRIs when they return, and they are different brains. And here's what's going on. Here's what Bessel's work shows us, at least in terms of pictures. When we go into a trauma episode, we're operating more in the limbic system. We're shutting off our areas of speech, our higher reasoning centers, see if I can use the laser. I got the laser pointer, but now the slide's gone. So imagine what I'm pointing at. It's theater after all. What the hell did I do? Okay. There we go. All right. Is it the green buttoned one? Is that it?
I think that's it.
The green button? Okay. Yes, thank you. Okay. So this cingulate, I guess is the way you pronounce it, that area there, that's our timekeeper, yeah? So our sense of time. If we in De-C-Ruit, instead of calling it triggers, we call them stuck points, meaning taking us back to that traumatic moment or a traumatic moment. When I smell diesel exhaust, I'm not here with you. I go right back to that night Marcus was killed. My timekeeper is offline. I don't know where and when I am. I also lose my sense of self, which is what Bessel not so appropriately calls the mohawk of the brain, right where the two spheres meet, our sense of self, that goes offline. Our higher reasoning literally goes offline. When he shows fMRIs of it, it's actually not firing the way the limbic system is. That's why when somebody's really upset, yelling at them, calm down, doesn't work. Because they're not hearing you. Their Broca's area, the areas for speech, understanding speech and making speech are offline. Well, that's where Shakespeare comes in place, right? Because it's heightened poetry that requires the understanding of speech, the use of speech. Because in most cases, even if we possess the language to relay our experience, our trauma experience, even if we have the language, that center might not be working if I'm in a traumatic episode. So here's what we do with, get the right one. Yep, there's just more of the brain. Those are the two areas we're talking about. Wernicke's area to understand speech and Broca's for the production of speech. Those are two other key areas that we're going at. And here it is. Here's a CAT scan of a brain. That's a top view. You scientists, I know you're laughing at me, but bear with me on this as I try to explain this. But the eyes would be at the top, looking, oh, I have this. Ha ha! There's the frontal lobe looking forward. Here is that limbic area, right? So the back part is the amygdala, our emotional core, all that stuff's firing. But this higher region is not as much. Did I knock off that? No, God. All right, the other part that's activated that really matters for our purposes is the polyvagal nerve. I mean, that's with all trauma, but for us, what we're trying to do is calm this down. Why? There's another, more colorful. This one's from Bessel's book, actually. I wasn't sure how it was going to come out, so I gave you a color one. And I'm having slide envy from the gentleman who went before me. Those were really kind of amazing. But anyways, back on. So what is De-C-Ruit and how does it work? Shakespeare, the question I get the most is, why do we use Shakespeare? Shakespeare was surrounded by veterans. The same people were fighting in his day as today. Today, and throughout our modern history, 70% of the population that served in the military, whether they're drafted or recruited, come from working class families. Working class. It's not drafted by poverty. It's in that middle area, the working class. The same was true in Shakespeare's day. Tradesmen, the horseshoe guys, smithies, I guess you call it, smithies. Sorry, I'll say it like that. Smithies and yeomen, farmers, those folk. Those were the ones fighting in his day as well. Shakespeare also, he describes post-traumatic stress, which I'll get to in just a moment, so perfectly. He also, I'm just seeing what I even have here, because I rewrote him last night. This is 2 a.m. this morning. I haven't slept much. So bear with me on this. In any case, the other thing that was going on when Shakespeare was writing his key plays in 1599, when he wrote or finished Henry V, wrote Julius Caesar, As You Like It, and Hamlet, they were at war. They were in 2 wars. A 9 years war in Ireland, which was mostly guerrilla warfare. Sound familiar, Vietnam veteran area folk? That 9-year war that we had overseas in Vietnam. The other war they were in was a conventional warfare that was on again, off again with Spain, just like we're going through. Only we've been at war for over a decade and a half in Iraq and Afghanistan. So he was surrounded by veterans and saw the veteran experience. So he writes to the veteran experience. The other thing that, the reason I use Shakespeare is we can borrow 2 components from military training that are key in theater, and that is camaraderie and breath. What do I mean? Bam! Oh, that's going ahead. Here we go. In military, in military training, this is just one example. When we're taught to fire the weapon, any veterans here today, by show of hands, just out of curiosity? When we fired the weapon, if you remember this, and it's all a little bit different, but generally the consensus is we breathe in, we exhale. We breathe in, exhale half our breath, hold it, and squeeze the trigger between heartbeats. That's how precise we get with a heart and breath rate, rather. Another way we use breath, cadence. We've all seen the movies, right, where we're marching in a rhythm and all singing together. We breathe in at the same time. We yell out together at the same time, singing cadences. Your left, your left, your left, right. We're all singing together in a rhythm. Well, Shakespeare wrote in a rhythm called iambic pentameter. It's the natural human heartbeat. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. So we're capitalizing on this by using, it's sometimes called box breathing or square breathing. We modified it slightly. Box breathing, for any mental health people, mental health folk in the room, you already know this. But what that is you breathe in for a count, you hold that breath for a count. You exhale for a count, then you remain empty for a count. We make it 5 heartbeats in the rhythm of Shakespeare's verse. So they breathe in for a count of 5, hold that breath for a count of 5, exhale for a count of 5, then remain empty. What we find through taking EEGs and fMRIs and heart rate variability, we find that this calms down the central nervous system. It brings the heart and brain right back into coherence. The proof of this is we will have veterans write down one of their most significant events that's troubling them through a series of writing prompts. When they get to that writing prompt, they stand in front of each other. That's in the top 3 most terrifying experiences for most people, by the way, to stand in front of others and talk. They stand in front of each other, and they share what they've written about one of the most significant events that haunts them. And this will take them right back into that traumatic experience. I'm not doing exposure therapy. I'm just having them dabble a little bit into that trauma. That timekeeper goes offline, that sense of self goes offline, higher reasoning, all these areas go back offline. Then they go seamlessly into a Shakespeare monologue, because I've lifted 35 monologues from Shakespeare's canon that directly relate to veterans' experiences. And I've edited them down for the veterans. They go seamlessly into this monologue, and because of Shakespeare's verse, it forces them to breathe before each new line of verse. So they breathe in. For example, Hamlet, talking about suicide. Not much lighter. You talk, what is it today? Big and funny? Not so funny, but big. Doesn't get much bigger than suicide, right? Hamlet's asking, to be or not to be, that is the question. Breathe in. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep. Breathing in a rhythm before each new line actually calms that sympathetic nervous system right back down again, so that they can relay their experience to them. This is a fancy diagram that my research partner, Alicia Ali at NYU made. I'm showing it because it's cool, but Jason, our chairman of the board, is also laughing. Anyways, that's the data. What I was going to do is show you that quick. Here's one more example to show how Shakespeare understands the veteran experience so perfectly. This is Lady Percy in Henry IV, Part 1. Her husband is a veteran, combat vet, just returned from combat. He's leaving in a few hours to go back into combat. She starts asking him questions in Shakespeare's verse. This is the best description of post-traumatic stress disorder I've ever read in the English language. So much so that Jonathan Shea, psychologist who worked with Vietnam veterans, in his book, Achilles in Vietnam, takes each line of verse and next to it takes symptoms out of the diagnostic manual describing post-traumatic stress disorder. A new line of verse, new symptoms out of the DSM. New line of verse, new symptoms out of the DSM. Line by line, 400 years ago, Shakespeare is describing post-traumatic stress disorder to a T. So this is not a new problem. Nor is the treatment using theater. The ancient Athenians, if anyone's a theater nerd like me, the ancient Athenians, in 500 BCE, they were all veterans writing plays to relate their experience to their fellow citizens. For example, Oedipus Rex was written by Sophocles, a veteran of 2 horrific battles against the Persians. Later, he and Aeschylus, another veteran of the battle of those battles, with Persia, writes a play called The Persians. Imagine in the year 2001, after 9/11, writing a play called Al-Qaeda or the Taliban. You'd probably lose your job, but they're doing it, putting it on stage for the entirety of their citizenship to see. Okay, now, moving ahead to the data. Just to make sure I leave time for you to ask questions if you have them. Keep in mind, the data that I'm showing you is 35 veterans with just a mere 20-hour course, meeting once a week for 3 hours for 7 weeks. By the way, it's really 5 classes because 2 of those classes are introductions, seeing my show Cry Havoc, and then them performing their version of Cry Havoc, their own little Shakespeare bit with their monologues. But we see an improvement of symptoms of PTS. We see an improvement of symptoms of the symptom of depression, an increase of self-efficacy, and this, most importantly, heart rate coherence, which is a significant improvement, and an actual different brain. The EEGs show a different brain from before they begin and after they take it, a mere 20-hour course. We're already starting to see rewiring in the brain and central nervous system. My dream is to do a 4.5-month model of De-C-Ruit. It's modeled after James Gilligan's work in Massachusetts state prisons. He did this with the most violent criminals in the Massachusetts state prison system. He used Shakespeare, classical actor training. Put it this way, De-C-Ruit was largely taken from his program. In the 1980s, he did this program with the incarcerated men. The men who graduated his program cut their recidivism rate by 95%. They cut daily violence to virtually zero, which had been previously measured in the double digits per day. And they cut it to virtually zero annually. So that's our data. I throw this up because there's always somebody who wants to know the expense. If you don't want to do it for ethical reasons, we can now show this to city planners. We just showed this to the vet court. I'm in Fort Worth, Texas, doing De-C-Ruit. Literally as we speak. I flew in this morning, thanks to Jason and Larry and Meredith, to show you this. And I'm doing classes at night with the veterans. And yesterday, or day before yesterday, they have a vet court started by a veteran, a former Marine in Fort Worth. And he wanted to know, well, what's the savings? What does the city save? Because that's how I get the city council to approve. This is just one example. 10% of the male population of the incarcerated are veterans. Veterans are not 10% of the population of America. We're not even half that. And yet we're 10% of the incarcerated rate. At $47,000 per year per veteran, that's over $11 billion annually to just incarcerate veterans, not even treat them, just keep them in prison. But then we have homeless, 50,000 homeless per night in America of veterans not getting treated, not being taken care of. If we look at our budget for war versus our budget for treatment, it's very, very, very small. It's minuscule. So the final part of the De-C-Ruit plan is to make it a transferable model. That means I can go into Fort Worth, teach the veterans the plan, the program, then they teach it, and they teach other vets. And it's free to all the veterans. So all it requires is a commitment from the veterans and the community members in that area, and they can keep it going. All they need is a space once a week. We've already got it in Fort Worth, Big Falls, Michigan, San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, upstate New York in 3 different areas, Vermont, New Hampshire, now the Netherlands, and 3 cities in Australia. They committed to providing a space for the veterans, and the veterans make it happen along with the community members. That's what we're doing. Shakespeare, at the end of Macbeth, I won't say it in case anyone believes in the curse, at the end of the Scottish play, Shakespeare has Macbeth ask the doctor, "Canst thou not minister to a mind diseased? Pluck from the memory a rooted sorrow, raise out the written troubles of the brain, and with some sweet, oblivious antidote, cleanse the stuffed bosom of that perilous stuff which weighs upon the heart." In Shakespeare's play, the doctor answers, "Therein must the patient minister to themselves." That's what we've been telling veterans for 200 years in this country. It's time to change that and commit to making it a community effort, not blaming Congress, not blaming the VA or the Department of Defense or anyone else, but ourselves, and taking control of our veterans and treating them and reducing our costs, if you need to put it that way. Thank you for your time this afternoon. No, thank you. Thank you. For me, thank you, truly. Yes, I want to leave time for questions. I'll turn it over.
Please wait for the microphone. The woman up here on the aisle. Yeah, please.
By the way, in De-C-Ruit, we don't allow raising of hands. There's no can I speak? It's just speak up, find your voice. But in here,
Here's my voice.
Yes.
First of all, thank you very, very much. Excellent work. Excellent. Have you found any particular kinds of traumas, or in your research, is there anything you think would be contraindicated? Like, obviously, it would work with certain people with sexual trauma, certain people with domestic abuse or childhood abuse trauma, obviously with vets. Is there anything that you kind of would tread lightly or avoid at this point?
The reality is, I think I mentioned it at the beginning, that the vast majority of the vets that I'm working with, and this is true with was true with me, and when I share it with the vets, they all admit the same, or not all, the vast majority admit the same, that we actually are entering the military with childhood trauma. I would argue that the military is attractive to those of us who have childhood trauma, because look what they're offering: camaraderie. a means out of our current environment, a place to build ourselves up. They break us down and build us up in a new way. If you'll pardon my language, here's what I'm writing in a chapter currently. When I entered the military, I really believed I was a piece of shit. And guess what they call us for the first 2 weeks of basic training, right? They're not saying, you need a hug, Wolfert, come here. They're calling me that, and I believed I was that. They break me down, but then they built me back up into this whole other thing. So we're trying to do a similar thing, but we're not breaking anybody down because they already are broken down. To answer your question specifically, I am a survivor of childhood rape, 6 years of age. So that was in this when I built it. I don't dare to presume to understand what women are going through that survive. One in three female service members has been raped during their time in service. That I have no comprehension for. All I can do is provide the space for them to speak and for them to guide me, which they are. We're creating a women veterans only De-C-Ruit based out of New York City. They are telling me what to put in it, not me telling them. Although I am a white male, and generally I like to tell you what you need, apparently, in this country. But in this case, I'm taking a step back and having you guide me. Hashtag me too. No, what was it? Time's up? That's it. That's the one. But in any case, we are trying to have the folks who've survived this guide us in changing this. It does require me diving deeper into Shakespeare, which I love, because the monologues, I would say about 50% to 2/3 of them, I've selected specifically relating to the veteran experience, whereas about 1/3 are just trauma. Now, for example, I'm working with Rikers Island in New York City, the prison in New York. Excuse me, and what I had to do on the spot was, they said, well, did Shakespeare write about being in prison? Yes, a lot. And in Richard II, it ends with Richard II in prison, in solitary confinement, describing what it's like to be in solitaire. We gave that to an inmate, and he went, never touched Shakespeare before in his life. He was like, I don't know it, I don't want to. He read 6 lines and went, yes, I know exactly what this means. So we can do the same thing with different forms of trauma. We just hand them Shakespeare monologues, because none of them are casual. Right? Shakespeare's characters don't enter and go, so it's a nice day, isn't it? No, it's like, I can't believe I killed the king, right? It's this huge epic event, so we give them a monologue, see what's landing for them, what's speaking for them, or what's unleashing feelings and thoughts and memories in them and cultivating it from there. It's a very long-winded answer. Did I even answer your question? Somewhat?
It was a question that I didn't ask, but it was a very valuable answer, so I can
Okay.
use that.
Okay. Well, yeah, I do this a lot, right? I use it as a segue to my answer. We're very careful. We're letting, it's trauma informed, and we mean that. It's not just a nice, clever name. It's, you tell us, what do you need? For one thing, having the space, a free space to, as Shakespeare puts it, speak what you feel and not what you ought to say. We find that is, right, that's the premise of group therapy, right? To get in there and then have you guide us, or not you, but the folks dealing with whether it's domestic violence. And we are in domestic violence shelters in New York State, and adult survivors of childhood sexual trauma. So we're getting there. It's slow. There's only 5 people. It's Jason, me, my wife, and 2 other scientists out of NYU. So we're growing very, very slowly, but we're trying. Yes?
Thank you so very much. Since this is only a casually biological focused group here, just wondered with the before you get these individuals into the theater program, if you do any pre or post cortisol draws, either via saliva or blood, to see what the stress levels are biologically.
Are you able to do that? Because I'd love to talk to you and do that. But no.
It's already being done by a veteran called Stacy Bear in Utah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, no. We've not done any of the blood. We don't have the funding or access to that, or haven't yet to date.
I'll make sure you're connected.
I'd love that. Let me pull some cards out and leave them up here for you. But yes, thank you. Yeah, we're not, though.
Other questions? Oh, there's a woman right here. Wait for the mic, please.
So how did everybody get broken to start with?
How did everyone get broken to start with? You mean
Yeah, you said they're
the trauma?
broken. Yeah, they're already broken when they get
Well,
in the war.
I don't know that I'd use the word
At previous
broken.
wars and transgenerational.
Yeah, it's all of that. I mean, it's, you know, I'm the child of an alcoholic, and most of the people I served with came from they're children of alcoholics, or my bunkmate in AIT, which is the training after basic training, had been, grew up one of the only black men in his entire white community, and at 18, got into a fight, killed the guy, didn't intend to, got sentenced to 8 years in prison, served 4 years in prison, was a model inmate, got his, or, you know, model inmate, whatever that means, but that's what they told him, got his bachelor's degree, and then they told him, well, you can spend another 4 years in prison or 8 years in the Army. So he took the Army. So that, I would say, that's how we get broken, is by society, by all the things that we've got going on, the gender binary, the racial divide, you name it. I don't know where to begin on that. Like, what broke them? America? You know what I mean? I'm not trashing America. I'm just saying, you know, that's what. I'm hearing the same thing, by the way, in Australia, in the Netherlands, in England, and Italy, which we've worked in all 4 of those countries. And they're telling us very similar stories. So, yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
Let's
What
get a
caused
guy
it?
way in the back. Maybe the mic could be handed over.
While they're getting up there, I'd say whatever causes childhood trauma is what's, you know, breaking us. And the military is capitalizing on that.
I thought you referred in one of your slides to taking people back to one particular traumatic event. Mm-hmm. And I assume, and you've been confirming, that lots of these people have experienced many traumatic events. And my question is, do you try to take them to all of those events, or is one sufficient to relieve them of some of the effects of the trauma?
Well, keeping in mind it's only a 20-hour course model currently, so no, we hit one. And Joseph Pennebaker, who is out of the University of Texas, does narrative. I modeled the writing prompts after his work. He calls it significant events to destigmatize the term trauma. The prompt is the incident that most affects me. They write whatever they want. Keep in mind 2 key things here. Number 1, they self-select. We don't go around asking for veterans or looking for PTSD diagnoses, nothing like that. We put the class up, they walk into the room. So something's attracting them to the room. Then, when they're in the room, I tell them, I trust that you made it to this age, so you have all of the survival skills you need to keep going. Use them. I'm not going to break them down. You're going to. So when we offer them the opportunity to write about these things, for example, or speak about them, they're only going to go as far as they are able, and we're going to coach them how to recover from those moments with the grounding, breathing in, and doing the De-C-Ruit breath, or square breathing, to bring them back from that moment if they get too far in crises. We do always, or not always, but we tend to do these courses in conjunction with existing programs, whether it's the VA, Samaritan Village in New York City, Liberty House in Fort Worth. So there are programs that already are doing this sorts of work with these veterans, have support structures for them if they leave our course and are having a difficult night that night. They have resources available to them. But no, we can't possibly get to all of their trauma. We just want them to grab one that they're dealing with the most right now and bring that into the room and use each other to help them guide through it and learn how to recover from the symptoms from that. I think I finally answered a question. Yes, other questions.
What support, if any, have you gotten directly from the VA or the Department of Defense? Are you too small to get that at this stage of the game?
Yeah, our support thus far has been a few crowd source funding programs, and my dear friend since 1982, Jason Cleveland, funding it, donations, him doing a lot of fundraising for us, Larry supporting us. That's where we've gotten the funding. The VA is interested in our work, but when I say the VA, I'm talking local and state VAs. I've not gotten access to the national VA folk or the National Department of Defense folk. I can only, I'm not a veteran of note, I'm not an actor of note, although I'm big in the Niagara Falls area. No, I'm completely kidding. They don't even know who I am. But because of that, because we don't have, a celebrity attached or anything like that, we're an actual grassroots program. And they don't really pay attention to us. Now that we're getting data, they're starting to, but no. I will say that the state of California VA said they wanted the show Cry Havoc and our other show Fit for Society, written by veterans, to be mandatory viewing for their employees that are not veterans and their volunteers who are not veterans. That was, what, Jason, 13 years ago, 14 years ago? It still just hasn't happened. The bureaucracy just constantly is getting in the way or something. Maybe they just are like, you're too small. But we are. We're less than $25,000 or $50,000 a year nonprofit. So, yeah. Other questions?
We have time for one more, and I see a person in the way back that's been waiting. Thanks.
And I can, while he's running up there, I can hang out for a few moments after, but I have to grab a plane right back because I performed tonight in Fort Worth.
So thank you for fabulous work that you're doing. My question is, in treating both men and women, are you finding if there are any differences, or brain is a brain and a trauma is trauma?
I used to say the brain is the brain and trauma is trauma, but now working with the women veterans-only groups, a completely different experience. And here's why. I talk about camaraderie. When the veterans complete the 20-hour course, our favorite thing to do is to continue offering a weekly course, just once a week, where they can come back together and continue the work. We then move into scenes. The very first scene we tend to move into is Othello and Iago. And what that scene is about for veterans, they hear it differently than civilians because they hear two combat veterans talking to each other about a new spouse. So when I ask them, who are you going to believe? They all say, oh yeah, the combat veteran. And then I started doing women veterans only. And we would do a writing prompt. Camaraderie to me is ... And almost all of the women have shared that they did not have a camaraderie-based experience in the military. This was news to me. I assume because we served in the military, we all had that. They did not, but they don't share it outside that room, or haven't shared it outside that room. They have to assume. Again, if you'll forgive my language, Jenny Pakinovsky, who gave me permission to tell her story, she's an Iraq war veteran, and she says, yeah, I go in the room with the male vets and I have to strap on my combat dick. I got to be prepared to talk the boys talk and, do all this. And then when I leave that, I can go put on my pink nail polish and wear something sparkly. But I can't do that in the room. And she talks two different ways in the room. She talks about not having a camaraderie-based experience in the Marines, which is considered the most camaraderie-based of the 5 branches. But no, the women, completely different. But again, this is new for me. I've only done the women veterans-only group for the last year and a half. Brand new experience, so I'm modifying it. But again, having them tell me what we need to change. Yeah, it's horrible. Well, with that, that cheery note, have a great rest of the day. Thank you all.